And welcome to all the viewers. In this session, we are going to look at prevention of poliomyelitis. In an earlier session, we have talked about the epidemiology of poliomyelitis and have learnt that vaccination is a key to prevention of this crippling disease. In fact, today we are on the verge of eradicating this disease, and this has been possible because of using vaccination as a strategy. So let's look at what are the vaccines available for prevention of poliomyelitis. The two basic categories of vaccines are oral polio vaccine and inactivated polio vaccine, also known as the killed polio vaccine. Oral polio vaccine has got subtypes within it. As we can see, monovalent oral polio vaccines, which cover the serotypes 1 and 3 of the wild polio virus, which has been attenuated, which means it has been maintaining its antigenicity but has lost its virulence and pathogenicity, but available as two separate vaccines. So that's why they are labeled as monovalent, containing one serotype. And the other one is bivalent oral polio vaccine, which contains a combination of both oral polio vaccine 1 and 3. So the one which is commonly used in practice is the bivalent oral polio vaccine. What we can see at the top of this slide are the different vials of oral polio vaccine. They can either come in glass vials or they can be in the form of cylindrical tubes which are available. What is the rationale of use of vaccination against this disease? It works on the principle of herd immunity, which we have talked about earlier, which means that if enough people in a community are immunized against a particular disease, the virus will be deprived of susceptible hosts and will die out. So essentially, we are breaking the chain of infection by protecting our susceptible hosts against entry of the virus. And even if the virus enters into the body of the human host, it is unlikely that it can cause disease if there is adequate immunity offered. That's why, in order to stop transmission and prevent outbreaks of poliomyelitis from occurring, it is suggested that high levels of immunization coverage of this vaccine must be maintained. So the cases of poliomyelitis, wherever they occur, are reflecting on low levels of vaccination coverage, because vaccination is the key to preventing transmission of the disease. With reference to this, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative is constantly assessing optimal use of different vaccines. So as we discussed earlier, there are several types of vaccines available and they have been under constant development, with the aim only to prevent paralytic cases of poliomyelitis and also to stop the transmission of the virus in different parts of the world. As of now, there are 3 countries which are considered as endemic for poliomyelitis. However, majority of the countries have eliminated poliomyelitis. The problem is the endemic countries pose a risk to those countries from which poliovirus has been eliminated, because still there is a single case of poliomyelitis anywhere in this world, there is a risk of children across the world suffering from the disease. So we need to curtail this risk of transmission by applying strategies of vaccination. Let's look at details of oral polio vaccine. This vaccine was developed by Albert Sabin. That's why the vaccine is also known as Sabin's vaccine. And we have trivalent vaccines which are available earlier, known as Sabin vaccine. In this vaccine, we have the live attenuated or weakened poliovirus strains. And this vaccine, which is trivalent in nature, originally developed by Sabin, contains all the 3 poliovirus serotypes or subtypes. So when this vaccine is administered to a child, antibodies are produced against all the 3 types of polioviruses. So if a particular serotype enters into the body of this particular child, it will be protected against it because there are antibodies produced to all the 3 types of poliovirus. In the event of infection, what happens is If a wild polio virus enters the body, the antibodies which are produced will protect the child against paralysis by competing with this wild polio virus so that it does not spread to the nervous system. Hence, paralytic polio is prevented. When we look at the way in which the vaccine is going to be effective or going to cause the immunity, what happens initially is, since the vaccine is administered orally, it is going to enter into the gastrointestinal tract. So what happens is, there is a local mucosal immune response in the mucous membrane of the intestines. So what happens is, when the vaccine enters there, the mucosal antibodies will be produced, and in case there is an infection by the wild polio virus, the antibodies produced at the level of the mucosa are going to limit the replication of the wild polio virus within the intestine. And once they limit this replication, what will happen is the transmission or the spread of this virus to the nervous system is automatically curtailed. Now, this response to the oral polio vaccine, the intestinal response to oral polio vaccine, is thought to be the main reason why we can rapidly stop person-to-person transmission of wild polio virus. Because in the epidemiology, we have seen that this virus is shed into the stools of the infected person, and that's why there is a risk of person-to-person transmission. Now, if the wild polio virus is curtailed or limited, so there is less excretion in the stools and there will be a rapid stop to the person-to-person transmission. So that's the way how immune response acts with oral polio vaccine. The advantages of oral polio vaccine is, the best thing is it is convenient because it has to be administered orally, because of which its safety and efficacy is increased, and it induces long-lasting immunity to all the 3 types of polio virus against which the vaccine is available. What happens is, once the vaccine virus enters into the human body, since it is live in nature, it is going to undergo replication and multiplication. So, and this replication continues for several weeks after vaccination. So the amount of virus, the vaccine virus which has entered into the child's body, is going to multiply so that it becomes infinite in number. And this vaccine, some of which the antigens will produce antibodies, the rest of the vaccine virus will be excreted in the feces. So what happens is, even if the feces containing this vaccine polio virus is transmitted to another person through person-to-person contact, it will then enter into the body of the person, another person, which will not cause any harm. So what happens now is, essentially we are providing passive immunization to people who have not been directly vaccinated, and this is more so applicable to areas where there is poor sanitation or there are conditions of hygiene are not really good. So what happens is, if one child is immunized with oral polio vaccine, this vaccine virus is going to be then circulated into the sewage system or into the water system, and any person who comes in contact with it is likely to be passively immunized, in the sense that there is no direct immunization, but the vaccine virus still enters into his gut. What are the disadvantages? The main problem with oral polio vaccine is, definitely it is safe and effective, but there have been extremely rare cases of what we call as paralysis. Now the question is, we are giving oral polio vaccine to prevent paralysis. How is it acceptable to have paralysis after administering the vaccine? So as we can see here, for every 2.7 million first dose of the oral polio vaccine, there has been 1 case of paralytic polio. And since this paralytic poliomyelitis occurs because of administration of a vaccine, it is known as vaccine-associated paralytic poliomyelitis, which is also abbreviated as VAPP. Now, the thing is, if you look at the overall risk of VAPP, it is definitely very low. So now the question is whether there is a benefit of giving oral polio vaccine in preventing poliomyelitis, and whether this benefit is higher than the risk associated with vaccine-associated paralytic poliomyelitis. From the figures given here, this risk is very low. So what happens is, definitely the benefit of giving oral polio vaccine to large number of children is greater than the risk associated with the vaccine. And this is the principle because of which hundreds and thousands of children all around the world have been immunized with oral polio vaccine, because if these hundreds or thousands were not given the oral polio vaccine, they would have suffered from the disease. That's the main disadvantage of giving the oral polio vaccine. And a second but rare, very, very rare disadvantage is that the virus, because it's a live virus, it can undergo what we call as a mutation or genetic change and can start circulating within a population, and if it is genetically mutated, it may cause disease in future. But this is a very, very rare disadvantage, and it does not stop this vaccine being used effectively in public health programs for prevention of poliomyelitis. Now let's look at how many doses and what's the frequency of dosing of oral polio vaccine. The oral polio vaccine is available as multi-dose vial. A vial contains multiple doses of the vaccine. In this case, it is around 10 to 20 doses. And one dose of the vaccine comprises of 2 drops of the vaccine administered orally. Now, what happens? If you give 1 dose of oral polio vaccine, it produces immunity against all the 3 poliovirus strains in approximately 50% of the recipients. It is advisable that there are 3 doses of oral polio vaccine administered at 4-week intervals. At the end of the 3-dose schedule, it is seen that around 95% of the recipients exhibit immunity against the disease. And the essence of this is immunity is long-lasting and probably lifelong. So once a person is vaccinated, it will offer lifelong immunity. The most important feature of vaccination is safety of the vaccine. To ensure safety of vaccine, we need to first know how a vaccine is going to behave. What do I mean by this? The method of storage of all vaccines is very, very important. As far as oral polio vaccine is concerned, it is considered to be a heat-sensitive vaccine. What do I mean by heat-sensitive? If the vaccine is not maintained at recommended temperatures and it is exposed to heat, it is going to lose its potency. What do I mean by that? It is not going to be able to be capable enough of producing antibodies once it enters into the baby's gastrointestinal tract. If you look at the color of the solution or the vaccine, it is clear, transparent, sometimes yellowish orange or light pink colored. It all depends on the manufacturer. Most commonly we will find light pink or yellowish orange color of the solution. And it is recommended that once a vial of oral polio vaccine is opened, as I said earlier, they are multi-dose vials, so more than one child is going to be immunized with one vial. So once it is opened, it has to be kept between +2 degrees centigrade to +8 degrees centigrade. We have to be careful that we cannot keep this particular vaccine frozen or subjected to heat, because if we do not maintain this, what will happen is the potency of the vaccine is going to be affected. The capability of the vaccine to produce antibodies is going to be affected. As we can see in this photograph, the oral polio vaccine vial comes along with what we call as a dropper, which is used to administer 2 drops of the vaccine. To ensure vaccine safety, especially in case of this polio vaccine, the oral polio vaccine, we have this particular facility known as VVM, also known as Vaccine Vial Monitor. And how do we monitor it? On the vial of oral polio vaccine, we have this marker which is known as a heat marker, which comprises of an inner square and an outer circle. And the space between the square and the circle is blue in color. In fact, the square is also light blue in color. As you can see here, this color is definitely lighter as compared to the color between the square and the circle. Now, this vaccine vial monitor is a very good indicator to suggest whether the vaccine is potent or not. But we need to know how to read the vaccine vial monitor. So, how to read is, as we can see, this same monitor is shown here. If the inner square remains lighter than the outer circle, and if the expiry date has not passed, of course we have to use vaccines which have not passed the expiry date, otherwise there is no point in using them. That's the first criterion to use any vaccine. So in case of poliomyelitis vaccine, it is said if the expiry date has not passed and if this inner square is lighter than the outer circle, it means that the temperature has been maintained appropriately, so you can use the vaccine, which is shown by a tick. The difference between this and this is the inner square is still lighter than the outer circle, but there is a slight change in the color. It no longer stays as light as it was before, but still, even if it is within the expiry date period, you can use it. Then when is the point when we cannot use? So these are the two criteria when we cannot use that particular vial of the oral polio vaccine. One is when, as you can see, that the square is not visible anymore, which means that the color of the inner square matches the color of the space between the square and the circle. This is the point when we do not use the vaccine, which we call as discard the vaccine. And this is the stage which is beyond the discard point, wherein this square has turned the color to such an extent that it is darker than the color which represents the circle. This is definitely the time when we are not going to use the vaccine. When you see a vaccine vial monitor showing this or this indication, it means that this particular vaccine is not potent anymore, as it has been not maintained within the cold chain at the recommended temperatures. It has been exposed to heat and it has been exposed to such a level that it cannot be used. So this is the significance of understanding the vaccine vial monitor. This is a way by which we monitor safety and efficacy of the oral polio vaccine. Then we move on to the inactivated polio vaccine. Inactivated polio vaccine is considered to be highly effective in producing immunity to polio virus. It is also administered in 3 doses in the injectable format. It is said that after 2 doses, the person will be it will offer more than 90% of immunity, whereas after 3 doses, it gives more than 99% of the immunity. But the problem with inactivated polio vaccine is it is administered by an intramuscular route. There is no way by which there is any contact with the gastrointestinal tract. Since the vaccine is killed, the vaccine virus is killed, there is no question of the vaccine going and replicating within the body of the immunized person. So what happens is the amount of dosage which is administered through the injectable form, that is the one which is going to initiate the antibody production. There is not going to be any enhancement of the immunity once this vaccine is administered, because of which we cannot know until when will the immunity once conferred is going to remain. So the duration of immunity or duration of protection against poliomyelitis is not known after administering inactivated polio vaccine. This vaccine was devised by the researcher known as Salk. So the vaccine is also known as Salk's vaccine. If we compare inactivated polio vaccine with oral polio vaccine, as we saw earlier, this also is highly effective in producing the immunity, and there is 50% immunity after 1 dose, whereas more than 95% after 3 doses. The characteristic of immunity offered by oral polio vaccine is that it is probably lifelong, because the vaccine virus has a capacity to go and multiply and replicate, and so the antibody response can be enhanced. And after 3 doses, the immunity will remain at stable levels, to a level whereby wild polio virus is definitely going to be destroyed if it gains entry into the body of the immunized person. After the occurrence of vaccine-associated paralytic polio, there was an increase in the use of inactivated polio vaccine. And initially it started with a sequential IPV-OPV schedule. So both were given together. Later, countries where poliomyelitis was into a level where it was eliminated, they suggested that IPV be replacing the OPV vaccine. The problem is, people who receive oral polio vaccine, in them, the contacts of these people, there is a continued risk of vaccine-associated paralytic polio, because of which the recommendations changed from oral polio vaccine to inactivated polio vaccine. Coming to the adverse reactions of polio vaccine, here you are going to see a comparison between IPV and OPV. For IPV, there are rare local reactions, that is at the site of the injection, but till date, there have been no serious reactions to inactivated polio vaccine which have been documented. The only rare but worrying adverse reaction of oral polio vaccine is paralytic poliomyelitis, or what we call as vaccine-associated paralytic poliomyelitis. And this vaccine-associated paralytic poliomyelitis cannot be detected earlier. That's why there is a problem. Once the vaccine is administered, only then it is going to come up, if at all. And there are no ways by which we can detect who will get vaccine-associated paralytic polio and who will be protected against it. Contraindications and precautions to be taken when polio vaccine is administered is, since oral polio vaccine is a live vaccine, people who are allergic to the components of this vaccine can show severe allergies. So if we know that a person is allergic to components of different vaccines, we better avoid administering oral polio vaccine in that particular individual. However, inactivated polio vaccine can be given, because in an inactivated polio vaccine, the virus has already been killed. It is also advisable that a child with fever or any moderate or severe illness like cough, cold should preferably not be given the vaccine at the time of the illness, because it may interfere with the production of antibodies and sometimes can cause severe reactions. So that's all about prevention of poliomyelitis. Thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe. Have a great time. Thank you.